After nearly 2 months, Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs are back in the AP Top 25, and all is right with the world.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Tuesday. Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, make every moment more. Right now, new customers who join today, you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. Folks, I know Marco Gonzalez is no longer with the Seattle Mariners, but I am still rocking the Marco Mariners jersey as spring training gets underway. But we are talking about Gonzaga's basketball program getting back into the top 25. We're also going to talk about their net rankings right now, what could, should, might, will change, and what this means for their seeding. What happens if Gonzaga sweeps? What happens if Gonzaga loses to St. Mary's in the championship game in the WCC? What happens if they lose the rest of their games? We're going to talk about all of those situations, what it might mean for Gonzaga on Selection Sunday. And we're going to close out today's show talking about Lisa Fortier and the women's basketball team. They have one regular season game remaining, what that means for them, and what their seeding might look like in March as well. But we're kicking it off with Gonzaga being back in the AP Top 25. We expected this to happen after their wins last week. The Santa Clara win, just like the Santa Clara loss, is what booted them from the top 25. The Santa Clara win is what's getting them back into the top 25. A little full circle moment right there for the Zags against the Broncos. We kind of figured at this point, with so many other teams losing, with teams like Dayton losing, with BYU losing, a handful of other programs in that top 25 conversation who just couldn't get the victories they needed, we kind of thought, hey, Gonzaga's probably going to sneak their way back in. And here they are. First time back in the AP Top 25 since January 7th. Back in week 10 was when that was. Or maybe it was January 15th. I think it was January 15th, sorry, because it was after Gonzaga's loss to Santa Clara. I ended an 8-year streak. 8-year streak of Gonzaga being ranked inside the top 25. It is still remarkable to say that out loud. When you look at teams like true blue blood powerhouse programs like Kentucky, like Kansas, like Duke, like North Carolina, like maybe lesser so blue blood programs like UCLA and Indiana and et cetera, it is really tough to do this. Yes, Gonzaga is in a conference where you have less difficult games than Kansas and Kentucky and the like, but to be a top 25 team for the better part of a decade is extraordinary. And now they're back. Are they going to go on another 8-year streak? Probably not. I don't know. It's the 10th longest streak in AP history since the AP poll has started. So certainly not something that is easy to just pick right back up and do again. But obviously for Gonzaga, the main goal was less so getting back, but just going on a win streak, picking up the next couple of W's. And right now, Gonzaga's in a spot where they don't care about if the streak's going to last 8 years or not. They care about winning these next 2 basketball games because it is crucial for Gonzaga to win these 2. We're going to talk about it a little bit more later in the show, but what they need to do to beat San Francisco at the Chase Center, what they need to do to, of course, beat St. Mary's and Moraga, those are the key things. But for now, we celebrate. Gonzaga's back in the top 25. BYU was the team that got bumped out of the top 25. They're no longer a top 25 team. I've been there for the majority of the season. Kind of feels nice, I think, to be able to take their spot in the top 25 when they left the WCC and had as much success as they have had this last season. They got 92 votes, which was 26th. Just outside the top 25. South Florida, shout out to them. They were a team that did not have any expectations this year. They are a top 25 team now as well. Amir Abdul-Rahim, Sharif Abdul-Rahim's brother and the coach at Kennesaw State last year, took over this program this year. They're on, I think they've won 19 of their last 20 games, some insane streak like that. Really good stuff from them. 23rd feels pretty good for Gonzaga, about where I thought they would be. I didn't think they would sneak all the way back into the top 20. I personally had them ranked 19th. the Locked On College Basketball rankings that we do every single week. Check out Locked On College Basketball if you have not done so yet. And I think they're right in that conversation. 23, again, felt right to me. They have a 22-6 record. They're 21st at both KenPom and the net right now. KenPom has their adjusted offensive efficiency as 10th, the 10th best offensive team in the entire country. They have dropped to 60th in adjusted defensive efficiency. That's a concerning trend. Gonzaga's defense continues to get less and less valued by the metrics as the season goes on. We've seen them have some struggles. We've also seen teams hit really, really good shots against them. Will Johnston went insane for LMU in the first half of that game, but Gonzaga's defense does need to tick up a little bit. But for now, we're seeing a team that's got the metrics, they have the numbers, they have the wins, they've been stacking them up in a way that gets them back into the top 25. Like I said, Gonzaga's not concerned about making the streak last until 2032. They're concerned about beating San Francisco, beating St. Mary's, staying in the top 25, because that's what happens. You either win these two games, and you're probably a top 20 team. It depends on what some of those teams around you do, what Washington State does, what some of the other programs in that range do. But if you lose one of these games, you're out. Even if a loss to St. Mary's, which isn't a bad loss by any stretch, a road loss to St. Mary's is understandable. Gonzaga needs to pick it up. We'll talk about that, but they would be out of the top 25 if they lost that game, assuredly, 100% certainty. So that in order to stay in the top 25, which again is not what Mark Few's focused on, but in order to stay in the top 25 for another week to start a new streak, they're going to need to win both these games. Looking at some of the other AP poll results, Kentucky is up to 16. They had that massive win over Alabama, hung 117 points on the Crimson Tide. Just an obscene offensive performance from Coach Calipari. They're up to 16. They didn't jump as high as you'd expect because they also lost to LSU. That is the ebbs and flows of Calipari's season this year in Lexington. Winning good games, losing bad games. It's just been all over the place. St. Mary's up one spot to 17. We talked about this already, but they have lost Joshua Jefferson for the season. That is a huge blow for them. Henry Wessels is a little banged up as well, their backup center. If he is not at full strength or unable to play for Gonzaga or for St. Mary's against Gonzaga, that's another nice advantage that the Zags could potentially have in that one. But right now they're absolutely rolling. The only team that has not lost a conference game this season. And they are looking to continue that streak for the next couple of games and get out of here with a completely spotless record in conference play. San Diego State fell one spot from 19 to 20. They blew out Fresno State, who is not very good. I think they held them to 41 points, but they lost to Utah State. Utah State's the best team in the conference. Not a huge shock to see that for San Diego State. Meanwhile, Washington State, they climb up to 19. They climbed 2 spots, and it was because they picked up a massive, huge win over Tommy Lloyd and the Arizona Wildcats on Thursday. Now, similar to what Kentucky did, they followed up their huge, massive top 20, top 10, in this case, ranked win with the stinker, lost at Arizona State. Ugly, ugly loss for Washington State. Doesn't kill them, especially coming off of that win over Arizona, but it also doesn't help them either. It also perpetuates the long-standing reputation that the Pac-12, RIP, has had for decades of cannibalizing themselves. Washington State beating a great team in Arizona and then losing to a bad team is kind of a perfect encapsulation of what has been Pac-12 basketball and to a lesser extent football for many, many years now. But Wazoo's still in the top 25, still hanging on to a spot, still completely deservedly so, and having a fantastic season and really kind of help setting up what should be a really fun couple years of having them in the WCC as well. Well, what does Gonzaga need to do to secure an at-large bid? Do they have to win out? What happens if they don't win out? We're going to talk about all of that, what this might look like on Selection Sunday. Coming up after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. Folks, get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins directly into your pocket. You can bet on all your favorite Zags in the NBA. You can also bet on your favorite teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. We're going to talk about the women's team later in the show and where I think they might get seeded. But right now, their national championship odds are still 250 to 1. That means $5 down would net you $1,250 and a big old celebration in Spokane if Coach Fortier's team is able to cut down those nets. If you want to join me in tossing a little bit down there, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're still looking at computer metrics, Gonzaga's net ranking, what their possibility of them still earning an at-large bid looks like now that the dust has settled a little bit. We know they're heading into a monster week this week with that game on Thursday at the Chase Center against the San Francisco Dons. That's a quad 1 opportunity for Gonzaga. They also play, of course, in Moraga on Saturday against St. Mary's. Very clearly a quad 1 opportunity for them there. Right now, as we're recording this on February 26th on Monday evening, Gonzaga is 21st in the net rankings. They remain 1-5 in quad 1 games. Those losses are Purdue, UW, UConn, San Diego State, and St. Mary's, with the win, of course, being Kentucky. Incidentally, all of those teams, all 5 of those teams have been receiving votes in the AP poll. 4 of those 5 teams are ranked, Washington being the outlier. Washington is, in fact, barely holding on to even being a quad 1 win for Gonzaga. It would be distressing, to say the least, if UW were to fall below the quad 1 line and that were to turn into a quad 2 loss. Now, 2 of Washington's next games are against both USC and UCLA. And if they beat Washington, they might move from quad 3 to quad 2 games. So there's kind of a lot of different balls in the air right there. I think it's more important for Gonzaga to avoid having that loss to Washington become a quad 2 loss. So we certainly want to see UW stay above 75th in the net. Gonzaga's 2-1 in those quad 2 games right now, with the wins being Syracuse and San Francisco, the loss being Santa Clara. 7-0 in quad 3 games, and then 11-0 in quad 4 games right now. And again, there's some potential movement. Yale's 83rd. If they move up to 75th in the net, that would be a quad 2 game for Gonzaga. They had a great opportunity against Cornell, the other top team, alongside Princeton in the Ivy League. Yale blew it, unfortunately. UCLA is 112th. They would need to be in the top 100. USC is 104th. They would need to be in the top 100. Both the LA schools are going on the road to take on Washington and Washington State, and then they're both going to be at home against Arizona and Arizona State. So big opportunities. If USC somehow were to go 3-1 in that stretch, they're a top 100 team, assuredly, almost guaranteed. So that's a potential opportunity for Gonzaga. Now it moves a quad 3 to a quad 2 game. It's not a huge deal, but it helps. It helps make Gonzaga's resume look better. And right now, Gonzaga controls a significant amount of what the rest of this piece is going to look like, because they have 2 huge games. Like we said, at USF, San Francisco's 57th in the net right now. They only have to be top 75 because that is considered a true road game, despite it not being played at War Memorial. St. Mary's is 15th. That is going to be very clearly a true road game for Gonzaga. So that is very clearly a quad 1 game for them. Then they'll play a game in the WCC tournament before they get to the championship. Assuming they finish second, they will just play the 1 game before they get to the championship. If they lose to San Francisco, they might have to play multiple games before they would get into that championship conversation. So Gonzaga's got at least 2 quad 1 games left. Probably 2 quad 1, a quad 2, and another quad 1, potentially. So what does that mean for them in terms of how this might get seeded? Let's start with them winning the regular season, winning out the regular season. That would put them 24-6. It would put them 3-5 in quad 1 games. It would put them 2-1 in quad 2 games. Currently, that could change. Best case scenario for Gonzaga is they're 3-5 in quad 1 games with 2 more wins. They're also as high as 4-1 in quad 2 games if Yale or USC or UCLA or some combination of those teams takes over. 3-5 in quad 1 and 4-1 in quad 2. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Definitely possible that they're in that position. If they win out the regular season and then win their first game in Vegas and then lose to St. Mary's. So they win every game from now until the championship game in Las Vegas. St. Mary's clips them and they lose that game. That would put Gonzaga at 3-6 in the quad 1, 5-1 in quad 2. Again, potentially 6-1 or even 7-1. To me, this is an NCAA tournament team. Gonzaga, I believe, has put themselves in a position where if they win every game from now until the WCC championship and lose in that game, they will still make the NCAA tournament. It feels like a resume that puts them in the 8, 9, 10 seed range. So while they would make the tournament, it is not a fun seed. They would potentially be facing a number 1 seed in the second round. They could be, if they drop down to the 10 line, they could be in that position where they face a 7 seed and then a 2 seed as opposed to having to face a 1 seed right away. But that's where I think Gonzaga's resume would net them if they were to win the regular season and then lose to St. Mary's in the WCC championship. For a while, the conversation has been that they have to win that last game or else they don't make the tournament. That still could be the case. I'm not saying they won't be sweating on Selection Sunday if they lose that game to St. Mary's, but I think if they pick up these 2 games this week, they're in a much more comfortable position. Now, if they win out, win the regular season, win the WCC tournament, obviously they're guaranteed a spot in the NCAA tournament, but I think at that point, there's a ceiling that's a 6th seed. Gonzaga, for all of the trouble that there has been this year, all of the strife and anxiety and concern, there is a path to Gonzaga getting a 6th seed in the NCAA tournament. Yeah, it's not where they've been in the past, where they've been 1 seeds or on bad years, 3 seeds. A 6th seed is worse than that, but it's still pretty darn good. And there is definitely, in my mind, a path to that. I think a 5 seed is probably a little outside the realm of possibility. I think that would be like perfect. Planets all align exactly as such. Gonzaga wins every game. A handful of teams that are in that 5-6 seed conversation struggle in their conference tournaments, and then maybe Gonzaga gets bumped up to the 5 line. I think that's pretty unlikely. I think a 6 seed is distinctly possible if they win the rest of their games. I think a 7 seed is also possible. It wouldn't shock me if Gonzaga beats St. Mary's twice, beats San Francisco, and gets a 7 seed, which is still fine. I don't hate a 7 seed. You got a decent matchup in the first round. Then you got a 2 seed. The 2 seeds are going to be somewhat vulnerable this year. I think that Gonzaga has the opportunity to upset a 2 seed. I don't like Gonzaga as an 8 and 9 because the 1 seeds are all pretty darn good. That's how it works. Gonzaga's already played 2 of them in UConn and Purdue. Those are very tough teams. Houston, very, very tough team. We'll see who ends up getting that 4th 1 seed. But for Gonzaga, would rather be on the 10 line or the 7 line. Certainly the 6 line would be fantastic. Now, here's where it gets dicey. If Gonzaga loses one of these next 2 games, either at San Francisco or at St. Mary's, and they also do not win the WCC tournament, let's assume they win their first round game in the WCC tournament, or they win until the WCC championship and then lose. So basically, let's say they win every game except for the Moraga game against St. Mary's and the WCC championship against St. Mary's. At that point, I'm not sure Gonzaga's in. They're very distinctly on the bubble, and they are going to be relying heavily on the committee. They're going to be relying heavily on teams around them on the bubble struggling in their conference tournaments. You need as few bid thieves as possible. You need teams like Butler and Providence and whomever to struggle early in the Big East tournament. Like, you need to make sure that at that point it's out of your hands. If you lose one of these games this week and you also lose the WCC Tournament Championship, it is out of your hands. I still think there's a path. Some people will say, oh, they're not even going to make it. I think it's still possible that 2 losses to St. Mary's still gets them in. They'd be 2-7 in quad 1. That's not great. They would be 4-1 in quad 2, potentially moving that up a bit, depending on if USC or UCLA helps. That's still pretty tough. I think you're looking at a play-in 11 seed, and that's probably the best case scenario. I don't think that resume would earn you anything more than a play-in conversation. That's the best you would do. If they lose the next 2 games, they have to win in Vegas. They're going to treat it as if they lose any of the next 2 games, they have to win in Vegas, and they should. They should treat it that way. They should try to win in Vegas regardless. But if they lose these next 2 games, that is it. They have to win that game. And if they lose these next 2 games and then they turn it around and they win in Las Vegas, they're going to get a crappy seed. Maybe they'll throw them on the 8-9 line. Maybe they'll throw them on a 12. I think that's possible at that point. 12 would be kind of fun. Get that potential 5 seed upset. But this Gonzaga team, if they lose these next 2 games, they have to. They have to win that game in the WCC tournament. That's the best guess I have right now at what this thing's going to look like based on bracketology projections and all of that good stuff. But Mark Few and the Zags, they're going to take it 1 game at a time, and we're going to have a big preview of this upcoming game against San Francisco coming later this week. We'll, of course, get you tons of coverage, getting ready for that big game against the St. Mary's Gales on Saturday as well. But for now, I want to switch gears and pivot to talk about the Lady Zags. They only have 1 WCC regular season game remaining. We're going to talk about where they stand heading into Las Vegas and what their NCAA tournament seeding might look like Coming up after a word from today's sponsor, Game Time. Folks, we are just 2 weeks away from the WCC Tournament, and Game Time would be a great place to get your last-minute tickets so that you don't have to miss out on all the excitement in Las Vegas. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all of the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and Game Time's best price guarantee, it is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. And this feature is super fun with Game Time's zone deals. You pick the section, Game Time picks the seats, and you get big time savings. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time, where you can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDON, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Again, that's $20 off your first purchase at Game Time with code LOCKEDON. Terms do apply. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, closing out the show today, talking about Lisa Fortier and the Gonzaga women's basketball program. They remained at number 16 in the AP poll after yet another 2-0 week for this team. They beat San Francisco by 26 points at home on senior night. They then went on the road to take on Pepperdine, beat them by 24 points on the road. That puts this team at 28-2 on the season, 15-0 in WCC conference play. We talked about their win over San Francisco on Friday's show, because that was when Yvonne Ejim announced that she was coming back for a 5th year. She's going to be here again next season. Super excited about that. She's been having a phenomenal season. And she did it again in that game. After announcing she's coming back, she goes out against San Francisco, drops 20 points on 9 of 14 shooting. Same game, Brenna Maxwell had 18 on 4 of 5 shooting. Very fun box score line from her. She also had 9 of 10 from the free throw line. And then Gonzaga went on the road down to Malibu, California to take on the Waves of Pepperdine, held Pepperdine to 34% from the field, 15.5% from 3. They were just 2 of 13. They also only got 4 free throw attempts in this game, went 3 of 4. Just a phenomenal performance from Gonzaga, particularly on the defensive end of the floor. Though they took care of business just fine on the offensive side as well. 4 of the 5 starters were in double figures. Maxwell led the way with 18 and 6 rebounds, but Yvonne had another incredible performance here. 17 points, 11 rebounds, 5 steals, and 3 assists. Like we said, 15-0 in conference play with 1 game remaining. Their closest game was that game against Pacific last week. That was only a 13-point victory for them. However, 12 of their 15 games have been won by 20 or more points in conference play. 7 of their 15 games have been by 25 or more points. The dominance that this team displayed in the WCC regular season is nearly unprecedented. This is a season that will never be forgotten in Gonzaga basketball history. The way that this team has played, the way they've conducted themselves, the experience, the depth, the talent, the balance, the coaching job, everything about this season has been one for the absolute ages. And now they're up to 12th in the net. And their last game is against Portland. They're taking on the Portland Pilots on Wednesday, February 28th, 8 p.m. Pacific time, late game. It will be on ESPNU, though, so very cool to get an opportunity to play in front of a more national audience. This is obviously a bit of a revenge game of sorts, as Portland was the team that knocked Gonzaga out of the WCC Tournament championship last year. This Portland team looks dramatically different. They had a ton of graduations. They had a few players enter the transfer portal. This is a completely different team than the Portland team that beat Gonzaga last year. While it's basically the same Gonzaga team, hence the dominance that they have displayed this season. Portland's still a good program, though, 17-11 on the year, 9-5 in the WCC. They crushed Oregon in the non-conference, won that one by 31 points. They beat San Diego State. However, they're on a 3-game losing streak. 2 weeks ago, they were 9-2 in the WCC, setting this up to be like a really good 1-versus-2 type matchup. Portland's now 3rd. They're a game behind Santa Clara in 3rd place in the WCC. They've lost 3 games in a row. Really tough stretch right now. And now they got to try to rebound and find a way to end this losing streak before getting into the WCC tournament. And they got to do it against the team that hasn't lost anybody, that has been absolutely dominant for months on end. I want to talk a little bit about seeding for the Gonzaga women's team. We talked about this a handful of times on the show. Nothing's really changed, unfortunately. There was a top 16 reveal for the women's basketball bracket. I think not this last weekend, but the weekend before that did not have Gonzaga as one of the top 4 seeds, indicating that they are a 5 seed or at worst, or worse than that, according to the selection committee as of that moment. Gonzaga has, of course, not lost since then. They are up to 12th in the net ranking, but the expectation is that they're probably going to get a 5 seed. They're going to be maxed out at getting a 5 seed. Realistically, what's probably going to happen is what happened, I believe, in 2019, that Portland is hosting women's basketball NCAA tournament games. Oregon State will get a 4 seed in Portland. Gonzaga will get a 5 seed in Portland. This is just a prediction. It's predicated on Gonzaga, of course, not losing any more of the rest of their games. Oregon State has to continue to play well. They could probably lose in the Pac-12 championship since there's a lot of really good teams there, but right now, Oregon State is 18th at the net, and Gonzaga is 12th. But Gonzaga is 16th in the AP poll, while Oregon State is 11th. That is some likely Pac-12 bias, some mid-major bias, which will not impact Oregon State next year when they are in the WCC, the same conference as Gonzaga. But right now, that is the projection. They're probably going to be a 5 seed if they win out. I think a 4 seed is possible. It probably requires some of those teams that are currently projected to be 4 seeds to lose, which of course could happen. And I think that's the only way Gonzaga gets up into that 4 seed line. I think they really want to throw them in that 5 seed, 4-5 matchup with Oregon State in Portland, regional game, lots of interest, sets up a conference rivalry potentially for the future. I think that's what the committee wants. And honestly, I kind of want it too. I think it would be cool if Gonzaga was the 4 seed and Oregon State was the 5 seed. But that's going to depend on how Oregon State does the rest of the year. Ultimately, I think they're going to try to make that matchup work. And again, it does a really good job of setting up what will be a far, far more competitive WCC next year. It is impossible to understate the impact that adding both Oregon State and Washington State will have on women's basketball in the WCC. It's not moving the needle as much on the men's side, although Washington State's recent hot streak has certainly helped that conversation. Washington State looks like the 3rd best team in the WCC. When you have 3 teams in the WCC that are all ranked or in that conversation, that's a huge good thing for the men's side of the WCC. But on the women's side, Oregon State and Washington State are consistently in that ranked conversation. Wazoo's fallen in and out, but those 2 teams are fantastic. Gonzaga, of course, has been consistently there too. So we're going to potentially look at having 3 ranked teams coming out of the WCC on the women's basketball side, when this year the entire narrative has been it's Gonzaga and then a Grand Canyon-sized gap and then nobody else in the WCC. That's going to change next year in a really positive way for Coach Fortier and the Zags. Really excited about that, and I think the opportunity to set up a future conference battle between Oregon State and Gonzaga, while it's a little bit cheesy that they're probably going to do that again since they did it 5 years ago, if it works, if they can make the numbers work, I think that's what they're going to do. And honestly, I'm all about it. I'll probably be at those games, hopefully, depending on what they line up with other games. So if I get the opportunity to go out to Portland and cover those games, let me know if you're there. Hopefully we'll get a chance to hang out and say hi. It'd be really fun to get a chance to see that game. That's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. I want to thank all of you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. We will be back getting you ready for the big game against San Francisco on Thursday night. We got some recruiting updates to get to, some Zags in the NBA stuff, all sorts of fantastic stuff coming up later this week. Thank you all for listening. And until then, as always, go Zags.